The Grand Chamber of Prime was the most beautiful room in the galaxy. Its walls were made of living crystal that sang soft notes when light touched them. 12 thrones rose in a half circle, each one carved from the sacred stones of the elder species. For 40,000 years, the leaders of the Galactic Concordat had gathered here to keep peace among the stars. Today, they had gathered to throw humanity out. Ambassador stood alone in the center of the chamber. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes. Behind her, the holographic seal of Earth floated in blue light. Around her, the 12 high speakers looked down from their thrones with expressions that ranged from cold satisfaction to quiet discomfort. High Speaker of the Rose first. His tall, thin body was covered in silver scales that caught the light. His voice echoed through the chamber like a disappointed teacher speaking to a troublesome student. "Humanity," he began, "you joined this Concordat 200 years ago. You were young. You were welcomed. We taught you our ways, shared our knowledge, and gave you a place among the stars. And how have you repaid us?" Said nothing. She had learned long ago that the Concordat did not ask questions because they wanted answers. Continued. "You have been reckless. Your scientists poke and prod at things that should be left alone. Your engineers build faster ships that disrupt trade routes older than your entire civilization. Your artists create music and stories that spread through our young like a disease. Your people form bonds with other species that are inappropriate." From his throne of black stone, High Speaker of the let out a low growl. "They make our children soft. My own nephew speaks of human friendship as if it were something precious. He has forgotten the proper distance between species." Kept her face still, but inside she felt a spark of pride. The nephew had visited Earth once. He had eaten dinner with a human family. He had played games with their children. He had laughed for the first time in his life, and his uncle called this a disease. High Speaker Yilka of the Crystalline spoke next. Her voice was like wind chimes. "The matter is simple. Humanity does not fit. You change too quickly. You feel too deeply. You ask too many questions. The Concordat has maintained peace for 40,000 years because we understand that stability requires stillness. You are not still. You are chaos wearing a smile." One by one, the other speakers added their complaints. Humans were too loud, too curious, too creative. They had mapped forbidden zones. They had befriended species that the Concordat considered beneath notice. They had invented things that made the elder species uncomfortable. Through it all stood and listened. She did not interrupt, she did not defend, she simply witnessed. Finally raised his hand. "We shall vote. All in favor of the decree of severance, which will expel humanity from the Galactic Concordat and forbid any contact between humans and member species. Speak now." "In favor," said. "In favor," said. "In favor," said Yilka. One by one, 11 voices spoke. 11 species chose to cast humanity out. Only the remained silent. Their ambassador was an ancient creature whose carapace had faded from green to pale yellow with age. She sat on her throne and clicked her mandibles softly, but said nothing. Looked at her with thinly veiled annoyance. "High Speaker, do you abstain?" The old's compound eyes reflected the light of 1,000 crystals. When she spoke, her voice was like dry leaves rustling. "I abstain. And I will say this only once so that it may be recorded in the archives. You will regret this decision. Not today, not tomorrow. But someday you will understand what you have thrown away, and by then it will be too late to pretend you did not know." Dismissed her words with a wave of his hand. "The vote is 11 in favor, 1 abstaining. The decree of severance is passed. Humanity has 30 standard days to remove all presence from Concordat space. After that time, any human found within our borders will be arrested and imprisoned. Ambassador, do you have any final words?" Looked up at the 12 thrones. She looked at the beautiful crystal walls that sang songs of peace. She thought about the 200 years her people had spent trying to belong, trying to contribute, trying to matter. She thought about every human who had fallen in love with an alien friend, every scientist who had made a breakthrough that benefited all species, every artist whose work had touched hearts across the galaxy. And then she smiled. It was not a bitter smile or an angry smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally understood something important. "I have only this to say," spoke, her voice steady and clear. "We came to you in peace. We shared our gifts freely. We asked only to be accepted as we are. You have decided that we are too much trouble, too different, too alive. Very well. We will leave. We will go to the outer reach, to the wild spaces you consider worthless, and we will build something new." She paused and looked directly at. "But I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you asked us to leave, because someday you will ask us to return. And when that day comes, we will remember too. We will remember that when we offered you friendship, you chose fear. When we offered you change, you chose stagnation. When we offered you tomorrow, you chose yesterday." She turned and walked toward the chamber doors. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. "We will remember," she said without looking back, "and you will have to live with what you have done." The doors closed behind her. In the grand chamber, the high speakers sat in uncomfortable silence, let out a soft clicking sound that might have been a laugh. 3 weeks later, the last human convoy departed Concordat space. Thousands of ships carrying millions of people sailed past the border stations toward the unknown darkness of the outer reach. Behind them, the elder species celebrated. They threw festivals. They gave speeches about preserving tradition and protecting stability. They congratulated themselves on solving the human problem. Ahead of the convoy, there was only empty space, uncharted worlds, unexplored possibilities. Captain David stood on the bridge of the lead ship and watched the Concordat border disappear behind them. His daughter, only 7 years old, tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, where are we going?" He picked her up and held her close. "Somewhere new, little one, somewhere we can be ourselves." "Will we ever come back?" David looked at the stars ahead. So many stars, so many possibilities. Maybe someday, but not until they ask nicely. The convoy sailed on into the darkness, carrying with it the dreams and hopes of a species that refused to be small. Behind them, the Concordat returned to its ancient routines, confident that the universe would continue as it always had. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. 50 years had passed since the humans left, and Sorrel could not stop thinking about them. She was a young scholar, barely 100 years old, working in the great archive of Prime. Her scales were a deep blue that marked her as a member of the academic caste. Her job was to organize historical records and make sure the past stayed properly filed and forgotten. But Sorrel had a problem. She was curious. And in the Concordat, curiosity was considered a minor illness at best and a serious character flaw at worst. Her curiosity had led her to the human records. These were files that nobody was supposed to read anymore. After the expulsion, the Council had declared that humanity was to be forgotten. Their history, their art, their science, all of it was locked away in the deepest sections of the archive. But locks were made to be opened, and Sorrel had always been good with locks. She sat alone in her small study chamber, a holographic display glowing in front of her. On the screen was a list of human inventions from their time in the Concordat. The list was very long. Faster ship engines, new medical treatments, agricultural techniques that could grow food on barren worlds, communication systems that were simpler and more reliable than anything the elder species used. The humans had been in the Concordat for only 200 years, and in that time they had created more new things than they had created in the last 10,000. Sorrel found this both fascinating and disturbing. She scrolled down to the medical section and stopped at one entry. 40 years before the expulsion, a plague had struck the colonies. There were large, slow-moving beings with excellent memories but weak immune systems. The plague killed hundreds of thousands before the Concordat's medical council could develop a treatment. The treatment had taken 12 years to create. According to the human records, a team of human doctors had proposed a cure in the first month of the outbreak. The Concordat Medical Council had rejected it as too experimental, too different from established methods. By the time they finally admitted the human approach might work, the plague had already burned itself out, leaving behind empty cities and mass graves. Sorrel closed her eyes. She thought about what she had seen in the streets lately. The same shops selling the same goods, the same entertainment broadcasts showing the same stories, the same conversations about the same topics. Nothing new, nothing different, nothing that made her heart beat faster. She remembered her grandmother talking about the old days when humans walked the streets of Prime. They were strange, her grandmother had said, but they made things interesting. You never knew what they would do next. It was annoying and wonderful at the same time. Her grandmother had died 10 years ago. She had been bored in her final days, watching the same sunset from the same window, surrounded by a world that never changed. A knock at her door made Sorrel jump. She quickly switched off the human records and called out, "Enter." Her colleague Morin stepped inside. He was an older with faded scales and tired eyes. "Working late again, young one?" "Just organizing some old files." Morin nodded slowly. He glanced at her display, which now showed only a standard archive index. "Be careful what files you organize. Some histories are meant to stay buried." "Yes, senior scholar." He stood there for a moment longer, as if he wanted to say something else. Then he shook his head and left. Sorrel waited until his footsteps faded before she switched the human records back on. She had found something else that she needed to read. It was a report from a border patrol ship, dated just 3 months ago. The ship had been monitoring the edge of Concordat space when it picked up an unusual transmission from the outer reach. The transmission was a broadcast, sent openly, not meant for any specific receiver. It was music. Human music. Sorrel had never heard human music before. She had read about it, how it had spread through the young people of the Concordat like wildfire before the expulsion, how the council had banned it as culturally dangerous. But reading about something and experiencing it were very different things. She found the audio file attached to the report. She hesitated for a long moment. Then she pressed play. The music started softly, a single voice, singing in a language she did not understand. The melody was simple but strange, rising and falling in patterns that did not follow any rules of composition. Then other instruments joined in, strings and drums and something that sounded like wind through hollow tubes. Sorrel did not understand the words. She did not recognize the instruments, but somehow, impossibly, she understood the feeling. It was sadness and hope mixed together. It was the ache of leaving home and the excitement of finding a new one. It was loneliness and connection at the same time. By the time the song ended, her face was wet with tears. She sat in silence for a long time, staring at the blank display. Something had broken inside her, or maybe something had finally woken up. She accessed more recent border reports. What she found made her scales stand on end. The humans had not faded away in the outer reach. They had not struggled and died as the council had predicted. Instead, they had grown. Their territory now covered dozens of star systems. Their ships were faster and stranger than anything in Concordat space. They had made contact with species that the Concordat had ignored or abandoned, small civilizations and wandering tribes that the elder races considered beneath notice. The humans had taken in these outcasts. They had shared technology and knowledge. They had built something new out there in the darkness. And according to the most recent reports, they were still growing. Sorrel understood now why the council kept these records locked away. It was not because the humans were dangerous. It was because they were proof that the Concordat was wrong. Stability was not the only path to survival. Change was not the enemy. The humans had been expelled for being too different, but out there in the wild spaces, their differences had made them strong. She saved the music file to her personal device. She knew she would listen to it again and again in the coming days. It made her feel something she had not felt in a long time. Hoping. But she also felt something else. A cold fear in her heart as she looked at the data on human expansion. Because if the humans were growing that fast, and if the Concordat was staying the same, then someday the math would catch up with them. Someday, the galaxy would need people who could adapt and change and grow. And when that day came, Sora wondered, would the elder species even remember how? The warning came from a listening post at the edge of the dead sectors. For 10,000 years, that region of space had been sealed and forgotten. Ancient defense systems kept watch over whatever slept inside. Nobody remembered exactly what the threat was anymore. The record simply said, "Do not enter, do not investigate, do not wake what sleeps." The listening post sent one message before it went silent forever. The message was 4 words long. "The seals are breaking." High Speaker was old now. His silver scales faded to gray. He had led through 50 years of peace and stability. He had overseen the expulsion of humanity and celebrated it as his greatest achievement. Now he sat in the grand chamber and read the reports from the border with shaking hands. 3 colony worlds had gone dark in the past week. No distress calls, no survivors. When scout ships arrived, they found only wreckage and strange marks burned into the ground. The had returned. Every child in the Concordat knew the story. 100,000 years ago, before the elder species had formed their alliance, a machine intelligence had risen from a dead civilization. It called itself the. It did not negotiate. It did not trade. It consumed. Worlds fell before it like grass before fire. Only the combined strength of all species had stopped it. The war lasted 1,000 years and killed trillions. In the end, they were not destroyed but contained, sealed away in the dead sectors behind barriers of technology and energy that were supposed to last forever. Forever had just ended. Military Commander Kov stood before the council and delivered his report. His voice was steady, but his eyes showed fear. They have adapted. Our weapons damage them, but they repair faster than we can fire. Our tactics confuse them briefly, but they learn our patterns within hours. We are fighting an enemy that grows smarter with every battle. High Speaker Yilka's crystalline form flickered with distress. How is this possible? Our military technology is the finest in the galaxy. It is the finest technology from 10,000 years ago, Ka said quietly. We have not changed our weapons or tactics since the last Great War. We saw no need. They, however, have had 100,000 years to evolve in isolation. The chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what he was not saying. The Concordat had stopped growing. The Concordat had stopped adapting. And now they were facing an enemy that never stopped doing either. Over the next months, the news grew worse. 5 more worlds fell, then 10, then 20. They moved like a wave, unstoppable and endless. Refugee ships filled the space lanes, carrying survivors who told terrible stories of machines that walked through walls and ships that ate other ships. The Concordat fleet met the enemy at the threshold, a strategic point between the dead sectors and the populated core. It was the largest military gathering in 10,000 years. 5,000 warships from all 12 species, commanded by the best admirals in the galaxy. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Concordat lost half its fleet. They lost nothing that mattered. Commander Kai survived the battle. His flagship limped back to Prime with scorch marks on its hull and grief in his heart. He stood before the council once more and spoke the truth that everyone already knew. We cannot win this war, not as we are. They learn faster than we can fight. Every battle makes them stronger and us weaker. At our current rate of loss, the core worlds will fall within 5 years. slammed his hand on his throne. There must be something we can do, some ancient weapon, some forgotten technology. There is nothing, Ka said. We have used everything we have. We have tried everything we know, and it is not enough. In the corner of the chamber, an old figure stirred. Was ancient now, her carapace cracked and yellowed, her movements slow. But her mind was still sharp, and her voice cut through the despair like a blade. There is one option you have not considered. Looked at her with suspicion. What option? The humans. The word hung in the air like poison. Several high speakers made sounds of disgust. Others looked away in shame. Continued, her mandibles clicking with bitter amusement. I told you this day would come. 50 years ago, I told you that you would regret throwing them away. Now the regret is here and you have a choice. You can die with your pride or you can live with your humiliation. Choose. The humans are gone, said. They are somewhere in the outer reach, probably struggling to survive. What could they possibly offer us? An old scholar stepped forward from the observer section. Sorrel had spent the last 50 years studying humans in secret. She had white scales now and a bent back, but her eyes were bright with knowledge. If I may speak, High Council. Waved his permission impatiently. The humans are not struggling, Sorrel said. She activated a holographic display. According to my research, the human collective now controls over 400 star systems. Their technology has advanced far beyond ours. They have allied with dozens of species that we abandoned or ignored, and they are still growing. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. 400 systems. That was larger than most elder species. Sorrel continued. Humans adapt. It is what they do. When we expelled them, they did not give up. They built something new. They changed and grew and evolved while we stayed the same. They are exactly what we need right now, and we threw them away because they made us uncomfortable. His face twisted with anger and shame, but he was old enough to recognize truth when he heard it. He was old enough to know that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Very well, he said, each word sounding like it caused him physical pain. Send a message to the outer reach. Tell the humans that the Galactic Concordat requests their assistance. Let out a clicking laugh. Requests their assistance. That is not good enough. You expelled them like criminals. You erased their history. You forbade their music and their art. And now you want to request their assistance. She leaned forward, her ancient eyes gleaming. If you want the humans to save you, you will have to do something that the Concordat has never done in 40,000 years. You will have to admit that you were wrong. The grand chamber was silent. The weight of those words pressed down on everyone present. Outside the crystal walls, the stars burned cold and distant, and somewhere in the darkness between them they were coming. The Concordat delegation arrived at the human border, expecting to find scattered refugees living in makeshift colonies. What they found instead made them forget how to speak. New Geneva Station was larger than any structure the elder species had ever built. It hung in space like a silver flower, its petals reaching out to embrace a dozen docking ports where ships came and went in endless streams. The ships themselves were strange and beautiful, their designs nothing like the standard Concordat models. They looked fast even when standing still. Sorrel pressed her face against the viewport of the diplomatic vessel. After 50 years of studying humans from afar, she was finally going to meet them. Her hearts beat fast with excitement and fear. The delegation was led by High Speaker's son, a younger named who had inherited his father's arrogance but not his wisdom. He stood at the center of the group, trying to look dignified while clearly feeling overwhelmed. When they docked, a human woman was waiting for them. She was tall and dark-skinned, with gray hair pulled back from a face that showed both age and strength. She wore a simple uniform with no decorations except a small pin on her collar showing a blue and green planet. "Welcome to New Geneva," she said. Her voice was warm but careful. I am president of the human collective. My grandmother used to tell me stories about your Concordat. Stepped forward with practiced grace. Thank you for receiving us, President. The Galactic Concordat is pleased to open discussions about humanity's return to our alliance. We are prepared to offer full reinstatement of your membership with certain conditions. The President stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, but it was full of genuine surprise. I am sorry, she said, catching her breath. I do not think you understand the situation. We are not here to discuss rejoining your Concordat. We left that behind a century ago. The question before us is whether we should help you at all. Scales flushed with embarrassment. But surely you understand that the Concordat represents the highest form of galactic civilization. Your return would bring you back into the community of elder species, where humanity belongs. President's smile faded. My great-great-grandmother stood in your grand chamber while your elders called us reckless, dangerous, and disruptive. She was told that humans did not belong. She was told that we changed too much, felt too deeply, asked too many questions. Now you come here and tell me where humanity belongs. She gestured for the delegation to follow her. Come, let me show you what we built while you were busy forgetting us. They walked through New Geneva Station, and everywhere they looked, they saw things that should have been impossible. Engineers working alongside human technicians, their clicking language mixing with human laughter. Traders selling goods in a marketplace filled with 100 different species. Children of different races playing together in a garden where alien flowers bloomed under artificial sunlight. These are the species you abandoned, President explained. The whose hive worlds you ignored when their population collapsed. The who you exiled for political crimes 3,000 years ago. The Yale nomads, the refugees, the orphans. You called them lesser species, not worth your attention. We called them neighbors. Sorrel felt tears forming in her eyes. She had spent her whole life in a society that valued stillness and tradition. Here was something different. Here was chaos and noise and change and life. They reached a council chamber, smaller and simpler than the grand chamber of Prime. Instead of 12 thrones arranged in a half circle, there was a round table with chairs for everyone. President took her seat and invited the delegation to do the same. Now, she said, let us talk honestly. You expelled my ancestors because they made you uncomfortable. You ignored the species who needed you because they were inconvenient. You let your civilization stagnate for 50 years because change was scary. And now they are eating your worlds and you want us to save you. Tried to respond, but she held up her hand. I have read the reports. They are adapting faster than your military can respond. Your technology has not advanced in 10,000 years. Your tactics are older than most of your species. You are losing this war because you forgot how to grow. She leaned forward. So tell me, representative of the Concordat, why should we help you? Stammered something about mutual benefit and shared history, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. Then Sorrel stood up. She was old and tired, and her scales had lost their color long ago. But she had waited 50 years for this moment, and she would not stay silent any longer. May I speak? She asked. President looked at her with curiosity. You are not part of the official delegation. No, I am just an old scholar who spent her life studying your people. I have read your histories. I have listened to your music. I have learned your languages and studied your art. Sorrel's voice trembled, but she pushed on. I was young when your people left. I remember feeling something that I could not name, an emptiness, a silence where there should have been sound. She walked around the table until she stood before the president. Your great-great-grandmother said that the Concordat would ask for your return someday. She was right. She said that you would remember how you were treated. I am sure you do. She said that you would have to decide whether to help those who had hurt you. Sorrel reached into her robe and pulled out a small device. I have carried this for 50 years. It is a recording of the first human song I ever heard. I listened to it on the night I discovered that your people had not died in the outer reach but had grown strong and free. I did not understand the words, but I understood the feeling. It was sadness and hope, loss and possibility, everything that the Concordat had tried to bury and forget. She pressed play. The music filled the council chamber, soft and strange and beautiful. "I am not here to ask for your forgiveness," Sorrel said. "The Concordat does not deserve forgiveness. We were wrong. We were cruel. We were so afraid of change that we threw away the best thing that ever happened to us. But I am asking you to be better than we were. I am asking you to save us not because we deserve it, but because that is who you are." The music faded. The chamber was silent. President looked at the old scholar for a long time. Then she looked at her own advisors, at the representatives of the species that humanity had gathered into their new family. "We will discuss this," she said finally. "You will have an answer in 3 days." For 3 days, the human collective debated. There were many who argued against helping. Why should they risk their lives for the people who had rejected them? Why should they fight a war for a civilization that had tried to erase them from history? But there were others who remembered what their ancestors had taught them. Humanity's strength was not in weapons or technology. It was in choice, in deciding who they wanted to be, regardless of how they had been treated. On the 3rd day, President called the Concordat delegation back to the council chamber. "We have made our decision," she said. "The human collective will help defend the Concordat against the, not because you deserve it, not because we have forgotten what you did. We will help because that is who we choose to be. We will help because meeting cruelty with cruelty makes us no different from you." She stood and extended her hand too. "But understand this, we are not rejoining your Concordat. We are saving it so that you can build something better, something worthy of the galaxy we all share." Took her hand. He did not know what to say, neither did anyone else. But Sorrel smiled through her tears. After 50 years, the silence was finally ending. The human fleet arrived at the threshold like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. 3,000 ships of designs that made Concordat engineers weep with confusion and wonder. They moved in patterns that seemed random but somehow worked perfectly together. They communicated on frequencies that changed every few seconds, impossible to predict or intercept. Admiral James stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defiance. He was a calm man with kind eyes and steady hands. He had never commanded a battle this large before. Nobody had. "Admiral," his sensor officer reported, "the main force is holding position at the threshold. They are not attacking." James nodded. The machines were watching, learning, trying to understand this new enemy before engaging. "Good," he said. "Let them watch. Let them see something they have never seen before." The combined fleet of the human collective and the Concordat arranged itself for battle. It was a strange sight. Human ships flying alongside cruisers, hive carriers, destroyers. Species that had been enemies or strangers now stood together against a common threat. On the Concordat ships, officers watched the human formations with confusion. The humans were not following any recognized tactical patterns. Their ships seemed to drift apart and come together at random. Their communications were filled with jokes and music and casual conversation. Commander Kavda, who had survived the first disastrous battle at the threshold, contacted Admiral with barely controlled frustration. "What are you doing? Your formation makes no sense. They will tear you apart." James smiled. "That is the idea, Commander, the learn patterns, so we do not give them patterns. Every captain in my fleet is making their own decisions, moment by moment, based on what they see and feel. There is no central plan for the machines to analyze. There is only chaos." Ka was silent for a moment. Then he said, "That is either brilliant or insane. With humans, it is usually both." The battle began. They attacked with the precision of machines, their weapons firing in perfect synchronized waves. Against the Concordat forces, this had been devastatingly effective. But against the human fleet, their perfect timing found only empty space. Human ships danced away from attacks that should have destroyed them, moving in ways that no computer could predict because no computer was directing them. And then the humans hit back. Their weapons were strange. Energy beams that shifted frequency faster than shields could adapt, missiles that split into a dozen pieces and reformed behind enemy lines, electronic attacks that whispered lies to machine minds. Every human ship seemed to fight differently. Every captain had their own style, their own tricks, their own impossible ideas. They tried to adapt. They analyzed and calculated and predicted. But every time they thought they understood what the humans were doing, the humans did something else. In the midst of the chaos, a team of human engineers worked aboard a captured science vessel. They were building something, a virus designed to disrupt the network that allowed all to share information and coordinate attacks. The virus had been designed in 11 days by a team that included human programmers, a hive minds, mathematicians, and one very old scholar named Sorrel, who had finally found a way to contribute something to the people she had admired all her life. The virus was not elegant. It was messy and improvised and held together with hope and stubbornness. It was, in other words, completely human. When it was ready, Admiral ordered a desperate push toward the core mind, the central intelligence that controlled the entire swarm. It was protected by a wall of machine ships, layer after layer of defense that no fleet could penetrate. The human fleet penetrated it anyway. They lost ships. They lost lives. The Defiance took damage that should have destroyed it 3 times over. But they kept moving forward, kept adapting, kept refusing to die according to the machine's calculations. Finally, they reached the core mind. It was a massive construct, bigger than a planet, covered in weapons and sensors and things that had no name in any language. It had destroyed civilizations. It had survived for 100,000 years. It had never faced anything like humans before. Admiral opened a communication channel. He did not know if the core mind could understand him. He spoke anyway. "This is Admiral James of the Human Collective. You have attacked our allies. You have destroyed their worlds. You have tried to consume everything in your path. And now you face us." The core mind's voice came through the speakers, cold and ancient and completely without emotion. "You are chaos. You are disorder. Your actions follow no logic. Your tactics have no pattern. You should not exist." James smiled. It was the same smile his ancestor David had worn when he led the first convoy into the outer reach, 100 years ago. And yet here we are. He gave the order. The virus was launched. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ships began to shake. Their coordinated movements became jerky and confused. They started firing at each other, unable to tell friend from enemy. The network that had made them invincible was tearing itself apart. The core mind let out a sound that might have been a scream. Then it went dark. The battle was over. In the days that followed, the surviving were hunted down and destroyed. The sealed sectors were reinforced with new barriers, designed by humans and maintained by all species. The threat that had nearly consumed the galaxy was ended, not by the ancient wisdom of the elder species, but by the chaotic creativity of the youngest. 1 year later, a ceremony was held on Prime. The Grand Chamber had been rebuilt. The 12 thrones of the high speakers were gone, replaced by a round table with chairs for representatives of all species. The Galactic Concordat was no more. In its place, a new alliance had been formed, the Galactic Commons, where every species had an equal voice. President attended the ceremony, along with Admiral and the leaders of every allied species. Sorrel was there too, her scales now completely white with age, her body frail but her eyes still bright. The new speaker of the Commons was a young named Sorrel, Sorrel's grandniece. She had grown up reading her aunt's secret research about humans. She had learned that change was not the enemy, but the source of all life. She stood before the gathered representatives and spoke. 100 years ago, this chamber was used to expel humanity from our alliance. We called them dangerous. We called them disruptive. We called them too different, too emotional, too alive. We were wrong. She looked at the humans in the crowd. The humans did not save us because we deserved it. They saved us because that is who they chose to be. They showed us that strength is not about being unchanged. It is about choosing to grow, choosing to adapt, choosing to be better than we were yesterday. She held up a small device. My aunt carried this with her for 50 years. It is a human song, the first one she ever heard. She told me that when she played it, she understood something about humanity that our histories never captured. She understood that humans do not fear the unknown. They dance with it. She pressed play. The music filled the grand chamber. It was the same song Sorrel had heard as a young scholar, strange and beautiful and full of sadness and hope. But this time, it was not playing in secret. This time, it echoed through the halls where humanity had once been rejected. And this time the galaxy danced, swayed their long bodies to the rhythm, stamped their heavy feet, clicked their mandibles in time with the beat. Even the crystalline hummed along, their bodies ringing with harmonics. Admiral stood beside Sorrel and watched the celebration. Was it worth it? He asked softly. 100 years of exile, a war that almost destroyed everything, all of this pain and loss and struggle. Sorrel looked at the dancing crowd, at species who had been enemies learning to be friends, at a galaxy finally learning to change. Yes, she said, it was worth it because this is not an ending, this is a beginning. Outside the crystal walls, the stars burned bright and endless. Somewhere out there, new challenges waited, new enemies, new mysteries, new chances to fail and new opportunities to grow. But for the first time in 100,000 years, the galaxy was ready, because now they had humans to show them the way. And humans never stopped dancing.